Good morning. I'm Frances Shannon, Acting Vice-Chancellor from the University of Canberra, and I'm in conversation with Michelle Grattan. Good morning, Michelle.
Hello, Frances.
Michelle, this week has obviously been all about the budget. What's your verdict on the budget?
I think the budget has set up the government for the election pretty well. I don't think that people will be running out with great applause, but I think what it's done is present a fairly solid story. It hasn't had a highly negative reaction from too many quarters, and it has presented things in the form of a plan, and I think people quite like to think there is a plan. Now, of course, the government now has to carry that narrative effectively through a campaign, which is another matter. But the government would be pretty happy with the week as it panned out, except the end of it when Malcolm Turnbull really did blunder. The government tried to be too clever by half. It tried to not give out the figure for the cost of its 10-year tax package so that Bill Shorten couldn't take over the money very easily. Well, he took over the money anyway to finance other things, and Malcolm Turnbull had a bad interview on Sky News when he was pressed on this matter, and question time was not good for him at the end.
So the opposition response, or Bill Shorten's reply, is always important too. What did you think of that?
I thought Bill Shorten devoted his reply to making the point that the opposition will have adequate funds to cover what will be quite a large spending program that it's putting to the people. Now, he took some of the government's money from the budget by saying that he wouldn't embrace the business package except a very small part of it, the tax cuts for the really small businesses, and this gives him a huge amount of money, getting on to $50 billion over 10 years, and that together with some other money that he grabbed from the budget really does help his argument that everything will be funded if there's a Labor government.
The Treasurer was keen to say that we must move beyond the idea that budgets are for winners and losers, or that at the end of the budget people consider themselves to be winners and losers. Will people really take that on board? Or mostly we have self-interest at heart?
One's tempted to say good luck with that, but there's probably half a point here. I think people did not have great expectations of getting things out of the budget, and of course most people haven't got things from it. There's some help for middle to upper middle income earners on bracket creep, but basically there are not handouts, and I think that people will think, well, that's reasonable enough when we're in a bad fiscal position. And on the fairness front, which is also quite important in this equation, of course the superannuation changes do hit the very rich very hard, but they're only a small proportion of people, and again I think that the majority of voters will see that as fair, and the ones who are affected won't be changing their vote anyway.
Let's talk about higher education for a moment. A couple of years ago, higher education was very contentious, and it remained contentious. But in this budget, really any decisions have been deferred, and instead there's been a consultation paper released, and the statement is that full fee deregulation is off the cards. Where is this going, do you think?
Well, who would know? I think that this is really a bad point for the government, not necessarily electorally a bad point, but a bad point in terms of its general story about us being a smart country, an innovative country, and yet after 3 years the government has no higher education policy. It really is a disgrace when you think about it. It creates further uncertainty. Changes are put off till 2018, and it means that the university sector is in limbo. But it's a commentary on policy making. Christopher Pyne, of course, failed to get the program through the Senate. that was despite the fact that almost all the Vice-Chancellors in the country supported it, and he couldn't wrangle it through the Senate. So I think that the government really has a lot to answer for here.
So we will have to wait and see and operate in limbo for quite some time.
Well, the new minister, or relatively new minister, Simon Birmingham, will be continuing the consultations that he's been having over the last 7 or 8 months, but we're not going to see anything quickly.
Malcolm Turnbull will be calling an election this weekend, and the campaign will be a relatively long campaign, a couple of months.
A very long campaign.
How important is this campaign period for the outcome of the election? How will it play out?
Given that the polls are close, I think it's very important, and also given that neither of the leaders has been through a campaign before. So that puts more unpredictability into it. And of course, there's the question of what's happening on the ground. It's always hard to know how the campaigns are playing out in marginal seats, because the national polls present a more uniform picture, but really it's much more patchy and lumpy than that. But lots of things can happen in campaigns, and I think that this one will be particularly interesting and potentially especially volatile.
Thank you, Michelle. Well, we will see how the campaign plays out, and we will talk about it each week over the next while. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Francis.